I thought the future would be cooler. I thought the future would be cooler.
You're listening to Learning is the New Working, and welcome to this episode, which is part of our Season 3, which we call Here Come the Learning Scientists. When I recorded this conversation with Mary Slaughter at the beginning of this year, she was Executive Vice President of Global Practices and Consulting and a Practice Lead of Culture and Leadership at the NeuroLeadership Institute. I knew when I asked her to come on the podcast that she'd be a great voice to add to our conversation on the new learning science, since she has a track record of being a great CLO. And had also just spent a couple of years working at this super interesting NeuroLeadership Institute where she was running NLI's global practices and consulting functions, as well as doing cultural and leadership practice. Life, of course, moves on, and whilst we worked through our excellent backlog of recorded conversations, the world changed a lot. It jolted into pandemic lockdown, and Mary took a new position. She's working now as Managing Director in the People Advisory Services practice at Ernst & Young, where she's working on purpose, culture, leadership, and inclusion, with an emphasis, of course, on behaviour change at scale and grounded in science, technology, and data insights. Mary has held CLO roles and talent development roles in organizations such as the SunTrust Bank, Alcatel-Lucent, and Wachovia. She's led human capital consulting practices at Deloitte, North Highlands, and of course NLI. And she served on the board at ATD, which is where I first met her quite a few years ago now. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology and masters of communication, and I think she's really well positioned to think through how neuroscience and academic thinking can be applied in practical ways in the organization. So let's listen into my conversation recorded earlier this year with Mary Slaughter.
Hi, this is Mary Slaughter. I'm Executive Vice President of Consulting at the NeuroLeadership Institute.
So Mary, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today. I'm excited for our conversation, and welcome to Learning is the New Working.
Thank you, Chris. It's always good to be with you.
As you know, in this series, we're really interested in exploring how our practice, the practice of modern learning and development, might benefit from the application of both scientific practices and methods, and also be kind of better informed by academics and the scientific world around us. I think you are really interesting person to talk to on this topic and very qualified because you spent a lot of your career in L&D, in talent development in industry. You also did advisory work and consulting work around that. But most recently, you've been working at the NeuroLeadership Institute. And I think the mission is to bring a sort of more concrete science-based approach to the development of leadership and talent in organizations. So I think there's a lot for us to talk about, but I'd like to kind of focus on your unique perspective on that, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, be happy to. I like you. I think I take a lot of pride in not only doing smart things, but doing things that are practical and can actually get done.
Yes, you bet. So let's start with a few practical questions then, and just paint a picture of you and your career and your organization. And I always ask people where I'm talking to them. So where do you live and why do you live there?
I'm coming to you live, as they say, from Atlanta, Georgia today. So it's my home. I live in Atlanta. It's a combination of things. Over the years, family has situated themselves here and in the southeastern part of the United States. I have other relatives nearby. But there's probably two other things. The weather is certainly one of them. I'm just not a cold-natured person. And then lastly, as my business life has always mandated that I have access to a good airport. And the airport in Atlanta has the dubious honor of being the world's busiest airport. So I can pretty much get anywhere I want to go, oftentimes with just one flight. So it's a easy way to transit.
Yeah, I spent many hours in the Delta Lounge in Atlanta, but it's a great city as well from many respects in history and so on and so forth. What is your job title, and what do you really do for work? Because they're not always the same thing.
And my title is Executive Vice President, and I oversee the global consulting function for the firm. What that really means is when clients have complex, difficult behavior change issues that they're trying to operationalize in their businesses, they tend to come to us to ask for help. And how do we crack that nut to get people from just talking about things they should do differently to actually doing them differently? So I do a fair amount of C-suite advisory work, but in particular paying a lot of attention to human capital practices, and really do have the pleasure of working with CHROs, heads of learning, heads of talent, heads of diversity and inclusion. It's a pretty robust range of people.
And I know you use the phrase behavior change, and that's very important, and we'll drill into that a little bit. But could you just describe generally the sort of mission and operations of the NeuroLeadership Institute?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're very science driven, and we would say that if the recommendations and the ideas are not grounded in science, we try not to speculate. We try just to talk about what either the neuroscience or the social sciences or cognitive psychology tells us about how the brain works, how it processes information, encodes information, and applies information. So we're very much focused on humanizing the workplace. It's such a push toward technology anymore, trying to find that equilibrium between the goodness of technology and where people still are the best lever that you have. And clients, as I said before, typically come to us because they want to figure out how to rapidly change behavior at scale across the organization. So not just with a handful of people, not just some significant coaching for a few select leaders, but at scale across the organization.
And just what kind of people work at NLI? What kind of resources do you bring to bear on those problems? I know you talk about being science-based, and I know you work with and through a lot of academic practitioners. Can you just sort of sketch out the kind of people that NLI hires and works with and how that works?
Yeah. There's probably a few domains that make sense. Of course, there's the sort of classic back office functions that any corporation has. But in terms of expertise, we tend to have two major levers that we pull with clients. One is on the consulting side, where I sit, and then the other is on learning and development. And so we have probably as our core function either people that are scientists themselves, so neuroscientists or social scientists, social psychologists, as sort of the core of the foundation of research. So it might be research that we do or research that we curate across academic institutions. So we'll have some people that are inside of NLI that are technically employees of the firm, but we also have a very broad science network. And so there are, at all the major universities, most of them have research labs in either neuroscience or cognitive psychology. And so that network of scientists plays a role in what we do and how we formulate our thinking. So we try our best to pull not only from inside of NLI, but also just the best thinking that's out in the marketplace scientifically around how the brain works, how cognition actually works. And then back inside, we have two other sort of classic spaces. One is the consulting function that I lead, and then the other is our client experience team. And they're the ones that help to collaborate with our clients to design learning strategy based in neuroscience, as a matter of fact, but a team that looks at what those learning issues might be, what the behavior change that needs to actually happen. And so we'll either take programs that we've already created ourselves and sort of off-the-shelf kind of learning programs, or if the client needs a custom program, we'll do that as well too. So that client experience team is a blend of instructional design and instructional delivery as well.
Got it. And what are the kind of solution areas, and where are people coming to you for help? Obviously, you talked about, driving change at scale. Is this about purely leadership? Do you work with learning teams to help mechanistically people get better at building learning cultures? What are the sort of what are those sort of solution areas that you're focused on?
If you went to our website and just looked up our practice areas, you would see three major practice areas. You would see culture and leadership as one. The second would be diversity and inclusion. And then the third would be performance. And performance is not only performance management, but coaching and feedback and manager development. You'd see sort of those three major domains. Those are all true for sure. But there's also two others that don't have their own sort of dedicated space on the website. One is certainly around learning. So we do have quite regular interactions and also engagements with clients around learning strategy, maybe to perhaps do audits and review sort of their approach to how they are tackling learning and what's working and what's not. So very much the neuroscience of learning, that's an area that shows up. And then another one that is fairly hot, has been for the last 18 to 24 months, is the big T word, transformation. And it's more than just sort of the classic change management. I would say if a client was looking for that, they probably wouldn't come to us. They might go to Cotter or someone like that sort of does large scale change management. Ours is more around what does it take in the brain to have the agility and also the motivation to be willing at a human level to actually embrace change. So digital transformation is a fairly classic one. So if a firm is undergoing, which 90% of them are, undergoing some level of digital transformation, the conversation with us would then be, all right, well then what do we need to do to get the accompanying human behavior change to go along with just the technology or transformation itself? So business models change, technology changes, and then they often turn to us for the human side.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. I've learned so much in my research this year about how important the human factor is in and around technology-driven change and digital disruption. It's absolutely top of mind for many, many people. I want to focus primarily. There's lots we could talk about, of course, but I want to focus primarily on the learning side of the house because of your experience and some of the good work that I've seen coming out of NLI. In fact, we had Heidi Grant, who is part of the organization, involved with the organization, talk to my team at Microsoft maybe 18 months ago about the neuroscience of learning. It's really fascinating stuff, and I think it's sort of an essential prerequisite now before you launch into learning programs is to understand how the brain works around the learning process. One of the reasons it's so critical these days, and our discipline of L&D is in such turmoil and such demand, is because business leaders are increasingly concerned about skills, about access to skills, and about developing skills quickly. What do you think, as a participant one time and also an observer now, what do you think is the state of the current learning and development industry?
You probably feel the same way about what I'm going to share, which, at least up front, Chris, is that the opportunity has never been bigger because there is so much disruption in the world of work, and the half-life of one's skill set as a contributor, an individual contributor or a leader in an organization, is getting shorter and shorter, smaller and smaller. And your ability to observe the environment that you're in, to adapt, to morph and change, and it's not just about keeping up from a pace perspective, because in some ways there's so much information and so much opportunity to learn being presented to us that we have to prioritize and down select and focus. And much around the volume of information and the number of channels of distribution right now, not helping. It's making it worse. So as a strategist, be it as